Thank you very much, Daniela. That was a really, really interesting and complex first session. And I think it brings out some of the aspects of what AWF is here to do. I've been a trustee now for a couple of years, and it's amazing how important it is to have a small charity like AWF that can focus on these really difficult topics that are sometimes controversial, quite often difficult to talk about, and that rely on having some evidence-based research to underpin arguments and to tease out new knowledge and new understanding. And it's been really interesting for me as a new trustee to see how the donations AWF receives can have huge impact through our community, through our veterinary professionals and our animal welfare colleagues. And you people who are listening today, you have the opportunity to make a difference for animal welfare. And I hope that AWF research can help you understand and drill into the detail to make changes. We take a proactive approach to putting out calls for research projects, and we look to address topics that are challenging, that are difficult, and that can lead to outcomes which our veterinary professionals and our animal welfare colleagues can really address in practical ways to make true outcome changes in animal welfare that really will make a difference in the future. We also look to stimulate the next generation of students and research colleagues to actually stay with animal welfare and to work in this area. And we pivoted quite quickly at the beginning of the pandemic to make sure that we could still fund relevant research and to fund projects which could be carried out through the pandemic, so that we have continued to deliver research outcomes that we have to talk about today. And you'll see later on in the programme a couple of specific projects which addressed issues that we thought were important around puppies being taken on during the pandemic, and the ability to access treatment for animals with chronic problems. So I hope that shows how we are looking to look at issues and topics that really matter to you guys out there, and where you can make a difference to animal welfare outcomes. So I'm delighted to have some of our researchers to talk to us now. I'm looking forward to hearing how they express the outcomes from the projects that AWF has funded, and how they see changes can be made to really deliver positive outcomes for welfare. So our first speaker today is Joe Neary. Joe is from Liverpool University. He was funded by AWF to look at improving end-of-life decision-making and timely euthanasia of dairy cattle and calves. So very focused project on a very important topic area. So Joe, if you're there, would you like to come in? Actually, it's a recorded presentation. That's what we're going to have first, a recorded presentation from Joe. And then after that, you'll have 5 minutes when you can ask questions directly to Joe live and to tease into the elements of his research and the outcomes that he sees possible from it. So hopefully now we'll see the video.
Hello, my name is Joseph Neary. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Livestock and One Health at the University of Liverpool. Today I'm going to talk about the project funded by the Animal Welfare Foundation into improving end-of-life decision-making and timely euthanasia of dairy cattle and calves. So I'm going to provide a brief background, describe the methods, just some of the results because of the limited time, and then finally the conclusions and implications and acknowledgements. So the goal of this study was the 6-month study was to improve the end-of-life decision-making and more timely euthanasia in dairy cattle and young stock by characterizing the issues faced by farmers and veterinarians when making end-of-life decisions. Why? Because this was highlighted by the recent Animal Welfare Foundation funded Delphi report, which indicated that this was a priority issue in farm animal production. And there's ambiguity surrounding what constitutes timely euthanasia and animal distress, and there's very little research into the barriers of dairy cattle euthanasia, as highlighted by a recent paper out of Colorado State University. So ethical approval was granted prior to starting this study, and 2 surveys were written using the software JISC. So one survey was only for dairy veterinarians, so those veterinarians that routinely go out to dairy farms, and dairy farmers. Each questionnaire was designed to take less than 15 minutes to complete, and farmers were asked questions regarding calendar year 2020. So questions encompassed all kinds of things regarding standard operating procedures, staff training, culling decisions, protocols present on the farm, timeliness of decisions, and then farmers and veterinarians were also provided the opportunity to expand on their answers at the end of the survey. As an added incentive for participating in the survey, farmers and veterinarians were offered a chance to win one of 4 50-pound gift cards. The surveys were advertised as widely as possible through Tesco Dairy Sustainability Group, Twitter, British Cattle Veterinary Association, some of the larger vet practices, and the British Dairying Electronic Bulletin. We did try other avenues, but for various reasons, perhaps due to lockdown and the various furloughs that were going on, we were unable to get it sent out through some of the major farm press magazines. So unfortunately, the response rate wasn't as good as we'd hoped, with only 37 farmers and 46 veterinarians participating. But those that did respond appeared to reflect the national average. So we had across the herds, the average was 220 milking animals per herd, 139 young stock, producing over 9,000 litres of milk per cow per year. And then across the farms, so within the milking herd, so those animals producing milk, there were 157 on-farm deaths, so across all farms, and then 198 euthanasias. There were 134 young stock deaths and 75 euthanasias across all farms. So that indicates that the milking herd, animals within the milking herd were more likely to benefit from euthanasia than young stock, with the risk of euthanasia among those in the milking herd at 59%, which was greater than the risk of euthanasia among young stock at 32%. The majority of milking herd deaths, so approximately 1 in 4, occurred for unknown or not recorded reasons. So that represents a huge information void, which is a shame. And then the majority of young stock deaths, unsurprisingly, were attributed to respiratory disease and digestive disorders, and then followed by birth defect, and then unknown or not recorded again. So reasons for euthanasia: injury or accident was the most common reason among the milking herd, so 44% of euthanasias, and it was the 3rd most common reason among young stock. 2/3 of young stock that died from respiratory disease and digestive disorders died without the benefit of euthanasia. Within the milking herd, 80% of animals that died from injury were euthanized, but only 29% and just 20% of those with digestive disorders and neurological conditions, respectively, were euthanized. We do have to be careful with those that last condition, say the neurological condition, because only 5 animals across all farms actually died from a neurological condition. So we just have to be careful with some of these interpretations. There was a clear dependency on a fallen stock collector and a lack of training on farms. So only 26 of 105 farm staff, so approximately 1 in 4, had received some form of euthanasia training. Euthanasia was typically performed by the fallen stock collector, and the availability of a competent stock person or fallen stock collector to perform the euthanasia had some influence on approximately half of farmers when an animal should be euthanized, which leads to the question: is it still euthanasia if an animal has to wait for a good death, which is the definition of euthanasia? Can a good death wait? I'll leave that question open. So there was some difficulty deciding when to euthanize, with only 20% of farmers had no difficulty deciding whether an animal should be euthanized. I'm surprised it was that high. But only 6% had no difficulty deciding between euthanasia or providing the animal more time to recover. Veterinarians appear to provide advice, but not training. So only 74% of veterinarians did not offer euthanasia training to clients. Veterinarians believed they had an important role in providing euthanasia advice, and this was typically performed over the phone on a case-by-case basis. And on average, veterinarians had high confidence in only 1/3, so 1 in 3 of their farm clients, that they are performing euthanasia in a timely manner so as to prevent unnecessary suffering, and that they contact a vet about potential euthanasia cases in a timely manner so as to prevent unnecessary suffering. There was discordance among veterinarians for some diseases. So vets were asked to indicate the time frame for when they would likely perform euthanasia or recommend euthanasia of a first lactation heifer in the first scenario and a dairy calf in the second scenario that were otherwise healthy relative to the onset of disease for a range of conditions. So for the heifer, 89% agreed on euthanizing the heifer within 6 hours for intractable uterine prolapse, but other conditions such as toxic mastitis saw no consensus in the time frame to euthanasia. For the calf, 65% of veterinarians elected to euthanize within 6 hours for clinical signs that were consistent with a septic calf, but there was no agreement of whether or not to euthanize a calf with suspect ventricular defect. That's likely due to extraneous factors influencing the decision. So in conclusion, there was a poor response rate, but farms that did respond were reflective of the UK herd averages. There was lack of data, so some of the key data that we wanted to get hold of was time to event data, so time from onset of disease to the outcome, whether it's euthanasia or death. But that simply wasn't available and is not recorded. Young stock were less likely to benefit from euthanasia than the milking herd, and there's a heavy reliance on fallen stock collectors and a lack of farm staff training. Injury or accident was the most common reason among cows, but they need to wait for a fallen stock collector to be euthanized in a lot of cases. There's difficulty deciding when to euthanize for both farmers and veterinarians are not providing training, and they're missing valuable necropsy opportunities on farms. I'd like to acknowledge my co-investigator, Professor Rob Smith, and Sherry Bedford, who was a research assistant on this project, who compiled and wrote the surveys and performed the initial statistical analyses. Finally, I'd like to thank the Animal Welfare Foundation for their support and funding this valuable study, which we hope to publish in the very near future. Lastly, the two citations that I mentioned earlier, the first one being the Delphi report, and the second one being some research coming out of the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. That was a really excellent summary of your research project that AWF funded. It's really good now to have a chance to talk to you a bit further, and welcome to this AWF forum. Thank you for joining us. I think I'm particularly struck by the amount of recommendations there, which are very practical. And I think I'd just like to kick off by asking you, how can we make the most difference the most quickly to improve welfare outcomes in this situation?
I think, well, this study was beneficial in making an important step in an area that I feel has been under-investigated. So I think just doing the study in itself is important. And I think it highlighted areas where we need to investigate further. So one of the objectives of the study was actually to look at the time to event. So from when the animal was first treated to the actual outcome, whether it was recovery or death or say sent to or other outcomes. That was one of the outcomes, but we identified sort of quite early on that actually that was one of the areas, one of the main things that was lacking. So I think one of the things that we can do sort of in the short term is look into those things, and it helps inform future studies. And then I think discussion of these findings with farmers and among veterinary colleagues, and helping sort of keep this topic at the forefront, and feedback I think is is something we can do in the short term.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to turn to some of the questions from our audience now. And we've got a question here from Deirdre Carson asking, what are the average waiting times for fallen stock collections? Do you have a sense of that?
Excellent question. And I won't pretend I'll know that. I don't know that if that data exists, and if anyone that's watching knows that, then please post that on the chat, because I would be very interested in that, in knowing that, given the results of this survey and the high dependency of fallen stock collectors for those euthanasias.
Yes, it seems to be quite an important aspect, doesn't it, that we're very reliant on fallen stock collectors, or on someone on farm having the ability to carry out the euthanasia in a satisfactory manner. I was quite struck in your research by the fact that many vets don't provide this training to their clients. Do you have any comments on that?
I think it's something that we could address in our teaching, but it's not something that that I know sort of veterinary colleagues of mine offer as a service, but I feel it would help improve animal welfare outcomes if farmers were more comfortable doing it, because it would help. It would help, I think, once a decision has been made that an animal should be euthanized. I don't see there's no benefit for the animal for waiting for those fallen stock collectors. It seems like it's a logistical challenge. But I can also understand farmers being unwilling to euthanize just because euthanasia is a traumatic event. So not all farm staff would be willing or comfortable doing it.
Absolutely, or doing it often enough to become proficient. I think another point in your research that's actually coming out in quite a few of the questions was around prognosis and the ability to have a good prognosis, and therefore to accurately assess the likely outcome and whether euthanasia would be the most likely end point. And I've got two questions here. The first one is around the importance of preventing injuries. This appears to be a secondary finding of the research. Would euthanasia decisions be easier knowing the cause of the injury?
Yes. So knowing the history of the animal can help determine the likely outcome. But with a lot of and it depends, it varies from condition to condition, as I note someone has mentioned there. I think James there has mentioned. So it is often a multifactorial decision. But one thing that we hope to do in the future is develop a framework which these decisions can be placed on. So we've got like a baseline for starting, and using the evidence, evidence-based medicine to help veterinarians and farmers come to a better and more timely decision. But it is difficult, and it does vary depending on the condition. If an animal clearly has broken its leg, then it's a large cow that's broken its leg, then euthanasia is really the only option. But if it's a more subtle condition, a metabolic condition, then it can be very difficult to determine what the likely outcome is. And again, that's another area that I think this research highlighted that we need to do more research in, is looking at getting the farm data, large collection of farm data, and looking at the outcomes. The difficulty is getting that data. Yes. And the recording of that data too. There was a lot of farms that didn't know actually why their animals died. They merely died and were collected by the fallen stock collector. And that's an issue that I saw in the United States. And colleagues of mine have developed a farm necropsy report, so they can actually have a record of why that animal died, and that's important information which can improve the lives of the rest of the herd.
Okay, Joe. Yeah, and there are a couple of questions coming in around that sort of topic, asking whether Downer cows were included in the questions, and I guess that's part of teasing into what was recorded by the farm. And there's another question about the toxic mastitis heifer, and potentially the reason we don't have a consensus on prognosis is around not having a good set of parameters that could be used to determine outcome. Did you start to get a picture of what you felt farmers should be capturing as information, and what would help them make that decision with the support of their veterinarians to get a better prognosis and a better decision.
They're good comments, and I think this identified that we need to collect that information, because right now there isn't really I'm not sure we have the incentive for collecting that information, but that information is extremely valuable for future studies. So there have a broad benefit for the dairy industry in general, but also on the individual farms. So just collecting that information and collecting that data and using that data. So what you sharing that with the veterinarian, and the veterinarian becoming involved in performing those necropsies on those animals that have died, that is valuable, highly valuable information. So, and then providing those parameters that we can provide, but I think it's only going to be up to a certain point. So I see the comment there that was made. I think we can provide some parameters, but again, the end decision will always fall to the farmer and the veterinarian.
Okay, I think we have 1 minute left, so I think it's a moment now to perhaps thank you, Joe, for answering your questions very thoroughly there, and for the excellent research that you've done. I think this is a really important topic which we all need to talk about more, and really draw in more information so that we can help make progress and make this decision making easier and quicker for the benefit of the dairy animals. So thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to ask any other questions, then please email.
Yes, there was some more coming in, so that's a great idea.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.